So I'm one of these people who listens to the Grateful Dead. I would never put it on without people's consent, that's for sure.
Zögernd.
Breaking new ground on this episode of Zögernd, interviewing someone I've never been in a band with, Mike Jackson. We have something else in common, though. We both work in newspapers. He's the editor of the Montague Reporter, and you can also hear him on the Montague Reporter podcast. For this podcast, we got talking about the functions of different kinds of music. I caught him just after a session painting a bedroom, and so I started by asking him what he'd been listening to.
I was listening to a couple of podcasts, and before that, I was listening to Pop Smoke.
Pop Smoke?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people this year, I've been hearing that Dior track a lot.
I'm totally oblivious, but this is the latest thing.
It's just been a big song in the streets during the protests this year. One of those background songs people are having for 2020.
Is it itself a protest song, or is it just kind of being adopted?
No, I would say it's more of a consumer anthem.
Really?
But yeah, it's just like a very determined kind of like driving song. The reason it actually came back into my head was I've been watching a TikTok user in Atlanta who plays, really like Yngwie Malmsteen-y, power metal riffs on guitar and rides around on a hoverboard, playing that stuff over contemporary hip hop classics. This is a really good retro-futuristic effect.
Interesting.
I've been really enjoying it. And that's one of the songs that he uses and just shreds over the top of.
I know you from your day and very late night job of editing the Montague Reporter, but I've also run into you at a few music shows here and there. And I don't really know anything about your musical tastes or how you approach music, and I want to learn all about it. So first off, just tell me what kind of music do you like, generally speaking?
Well, I think I have one of these kind of patchwork consumerist musical tastes based on, being different places and hanging out with different people at different stages of my life and periodically getting into something new. I'm a later in life heavy music fan, I'd say. And, I listen to pretty pedestrian kind of indie stuff with, a smattering of other stuff from around the world. And then I also have a streak of hip-hop fandom that goes back to, 93 or so. Every couple of years, I kind of, in order to try to not feel super old, try to catch up a little bit on what's happening there.
The shows that I've encountered you at have been pretty noisy, improvised, underground type stuff. What percentage of your musical diet is that?
Well, now that we've got the COVID, I'd say actually less, because that's stuff that I'm more into live. I'm not like a huge collector. If I'm putting stuff on in the home, it's usually going to be kind of a little bit more functional to the experience I'm trying to be having. What do you think about those those noisier and more experimental Western Mass underground shows we've been running into each other at?
I enjoy them in much smaller doses. Well, 0 doses nowadays, but at this stage in my life, smaller doses than I did previously. But I played a lot of it and listened to a lot of it, end of high school through college. And I guess as I get older and become more of a fuddy-duddy, I appreciate 3-minute pop songs more, and that's more where my interest lies. But every now and then to break out of that and do something completely different is exactly what the doctor ordered. So I wouldn't mind a Root Cellar show right about now.
That's for sure. Have you been logging into any Zoom shows anyone's been having?
Very few of them. The experience of being at a live show and sitting and watching is much different than the experience of sitting and watching at my desk in front of my computer as I am right now. Not to say I wouldn't enjoy it, but there's definitely less incentive to seek that out than to actually like get ready to go to a show. I don't know why that is. I don't have a good answer for that. It's less immersive.
For me, that's partly volume. I'm like a very tactile listener. I'm someone who likes to get up to the subwoofers, in a bass heavy show, and not having some of that is part of it. And then part of it's just kind of, the social nature of live music. I listened to one a month or two ago. I was patching a hole in the drywall of my roommate's room after he moved out. So I was very slowly putting joint compound around, sanding it down, putting in joint compound, while friends of mine who are both musicians and partnered with each other, so they live together, were playing a little show on Zoom for just a few people. And I listened to their whole set just sitting in a chair in front of a wall with my phone on my lap and my headphones in, just like slowly doing this work and worked my way all the way around it while they played this, like, it was like maybe like a 40-minute long kind of like ambient, like jam that they, and then at the end of it, it was like I just finished the job and they finished their set, and then it was like everyone who was on the call just kind of like chatting a little bit. It was really funny. It was like the most positive kind of like live music experience I think I've had during COVID.
Do you know anybody who doesn't like music?
I don't know if I've ever talked with anyone who like dislikes music, but disinterest definitely. Mm-hmm. I think people's brains work differently. I'm not a visual thinker, so I have a very low appreciation for visual art. If someone else explains to me what they like about it, sometimes I can start seeing quality. So I'm sure that a lot of people come at music kind of the same way.
Does that make you more of an auditory learner than a visual learner?
Yeah, well, auditory and tactile.
Tactile.
Yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, probably auditory.
Okay. Well, I'm interested now in the visual distinction, because you're involved in a medium that's somewhat visual. You're laying out a newspaper, hoping to create something that is eye-catching. Taking on any new job is going to be a learning curve, but was that a struggle starting out?
I would say has been and still is. I've got some spatial reasoning, so I can pack the trunk of a car pretty well. That's like the approach that I think I take to the Montague Reporter layout.
Okay.
It would look differently if someone with an artistic eye were laying out our front page. That's for sure. But if I'm trying to do tasks, and especially like if I'm trying to do a repetitive task on a computer, or at previous jobs, a repetitive manual task that has a sequence to it, sometimes I'll figure out the sequence and then I'll actually like make a little song in my head for it. Then I can actually start doing the sequence really quickly if I'm just kind of like singing the song in my head. When I finished the entire paper and sent it to the printer and I'm trying to reduce the file sizes of all the pages, there's one that, it's basically all the shortcut menus for reducing a PDF, run through it 16 times or 18 times, selecting the thing and then changing the file name and saving it in a certain way.
Alt-DZ, enter, click S, enter, Alt-FC. Alt-DZ, enter, click S, enter, Alt-FC.
At that point, I've usually been up all night, so it's just, I do it once and then the song plays in my head and I run through it, several times. I used to do a similar thing. My first job in Turner's was, there's a fish farm. There were a lot of things that, I would just learn how to do and do routinely with little songs like that.
With the one that you do for when you're processing the pages, does it have a melody that you borrowed from somewhere else, or is it just something that kind of popped into your head? Where did it come from?
I think it's just a little melody that comes from whatever the commands are. So do 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 do. Can something that loops well, and then you just kind of fly through it. You seem fascinated with this idea that music can actually be used to our advantage.
I'm interested in the ways in which we pay attention to it, and something I absolutely cannot do is read or try to concentrate on any kind of semi-complex task like editing a story. I cannot have any kind of music distracting me while I'm doing that. On the one hand, the words of the story that I'm trying to read I'm trying to give them my full undivided attention. The music would be either a temptation. I'd want to pay attention to that song if it's a good song that I want to listen to, or just a distraction, repetition distracting me from the task at hand. So I'm always mystified when I see people in the office and they're working on a story, they're typing away, and they've got headphones in. So your example is kind of marrying the two of those, and I that was a possibility that I had not considered before. So that's why I've seized on this.
I'm a similar way with any music with words. I can't do anything with words.
Yeah.
But I find that if there's something that is instrumental and I'm familiar with it, like I know where it's going to go, it won't distract me. I've got some things that are stock, and I'll put it on kind of in order to put up a little bit of a sensory barrier between me and the non-work environment. So I'm one of these people who listens to the Grateful Dead. I would never put it on without people's consent, that's for sure. One of the ways I listen to them is when I'm working, because I can listen to, I can just put on some live show of theirs and have it be just in the background, and my brain knows all the songs, but they're running through, to some extent, a novel version of it. So there's no surprises that'll take me out of the work that I'm doing. And, they'll just kind of famously noodle on for hours, which, fits well with the workflow.
I haven't tested this scientifically, but I feel like even instrumental music, kind of simple Muzak style background music, would even be distracting for me in that situation. When I need to block out other sound when I'm working, I will put on some kind of white noise. I've got it bookmarked on my work computer. I listen to the hum generated by the USS Enterprise's engines, a constant tone, and also very comforting, because that was my TV show growing up.
The Next Generation?
Yes.
Yeah. Different jobs have called for different music for me. I had kind of a cubicle farm job for a couple of years in Boston, doing stuff that kind of amounted to data entry, processing a lot of paperwork and just a lot of really routine tasks. And I ended up finding that I needed to listen to something really aggressive and fast and heavy in order to not fall asleep on the job.
Mm.
And I started getting into metal that I have not liked in any other context, like really brutal technical death metal. Just would sit there on headphones listening to stuff like that. Some of it holds up. There's I'll still listen to like insect warfare or cattle decapitation sometimes, but some of it was just like really like pretty garbage, Cookie Monster vocals, kind of like drilling into the head to keep you awake stuff.
Musical caffeine.
A musical 16-ounce can of Diet Coke. Do you consume streaming services at this point?
Very rarely. Most of my listening time, since I block it out when I'm trying not to be distracted, is when I'm driving in the car. Primarily for that reason, I'm still reliant on CDs, whether my own collection or more usually these days getting stuff out of the library, whether it's old classics that I realize that I ought to know about, or just something that I read somewhere and I do a search, and lo and behold, some library in Medway has this obscure album that I'm looking for. All else fails, then I'll go on Spotify. But that I really need to like carve out time and sit down and listen to it. Another thing is like I can't really just sit still and listen to music. I need to be driving or folding laundry or something. So kind of like sitting there and babysitting Spotify and making sure it goes where I want it to go is a barrier for me.
You said earlier you prefer the 3-minute pop songs sometimes. Are you a Powerpop fan?
No. Powerpop I find slightly distasteful. I maybe in small doses like we've been talking about. More, rock. But also, I stumbled across a perfectly stupid song, but it's just delightful and entertaining the other day. And I thought it was new and hip, and turns out it's from 2008. But yeah, plenty of, I guess, guilty pleasures that aren't necessarily so guilty. When I was talking about the 3-minute pop song, I think just a well-crafted song of whatever genre that is concise. And I was never a Grateful Dead fan, but I did go through a Fish period. So the extended jams I'm familiar with, I have enjoyed at other times in my life, not so much these days, but every now and then nostalgia will kick in. But yeah, if someone has a interesting musical idea to express and they do it in just the right amount of time, that's where it's at.
I think I'm curious about people in our generation, the transition of how people find out about music. When you were bringing up the library in Medway, I was thinking a lot about, I'm from Metro West Boston area. One of the reasons we were really lucky in that school is we had a radio station. That was like my extracurricular. Had a radio show kind of sophomore through senior year. Not only did we have a radio station in our high school, so we had the competitive drive, but I would go to Framingham, which is a couple towns over, and check out the maximum stack of CDs regularly and bring them home. And I'd make lists of things to search at the library, is a regular thing. And I know that a lot of people had an experience, in the 80s and 90s that was like really oriented around kind of like fanzines, or like just different things where you're making a list. And then when you get to be able to go into a store or go into a library, you've got a list of the things that you're searching for, and just like what an absolute inversion that is, and how that affects, how people find out about music.
And of course there's, I guess Spotify does this too, but Pandora was the one that was famous for, you play a song, it identifies the next song that sounds like that it thinks you will like, and it kind of spoon feeds you that type of music. There was a book I was reading.
How to Do Nothing. Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell.
She talked about, I used Pandora and it gave me all this stuff that I loved and it was great. And then I would be driving in my car and my favorite radio station would get out of range and I was forced to switch to something else, and I discovered something that I never knew I would like.
My dad, a musician for much of his life, says that this is actually the definition of good music. Music that sneaks up on you and changes you. And if we're able to leave room for the encounters that will change us in ways we can't yet see, we can also acknowledge that we are each a confluence of forces that exceed our own understanding. This explains why, when I hear a song I unexpectedly like, I sometimes feel like something I don't know is talking to something else I don't know through me.
The serendipitous circumstances where you are confronted with something that hasn't been chosen by an algorithm that thinks it understands you, those moments are very important.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was a Spotify holdout until about last year also, so it's just hitting me how weird it is.
One of the questions or distinctions that I'm interested in, and I'm not even sure it is a meaningful distinction, but that is between listener and musician. I feel like a lot of shows that I go to, primarily the audience is made up of other musicians. I'm interested in the perspectives of people that aren't, trying to hone their own craft or promote their own band, and just what they get out of going to a show or listening to a piece of music.
Yeah, probably different things for different folks. I've noticed sometimes here in this neck of the woods, I'll look around and be at a show where there's 20, 30 people in the audience and realize that I'm just about the only one whose music I don't listen to.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little bit more immersed in, I guess, the scene when I started helping people book shows, which I did for, kind of maybe a 4-year stretch at the Brick House here in Turner's. We've got a little performance space there, and I'm on the board, so I had a key, and I helped just kind of really out of the blue and like on an impulse booked a show that went really well. People really liked the room. and asked if they could do shows. And it was just one of these, like, one thing led to another. And, 2 years later, I was like, it peaked around, 6 or 7 shows a month, probably. I was helping people put on there.
Brick House is a community resource center, youth focused. Tell me a little bit more about it.
We run like a afternoon teen center, which is a little different now because COVID. Also, we're a social service agency, do supports of different sorts for families and parents and for youth. It's in this old firehouse on 3rd Street in Turner's. When the organization moved into that building, there had been a project called the Avenue A Music Project that ran for several years that, was helping area youth have access to instruments and a studio and actually record their own CDs at the time. When they moved into that building, a lot of the decisions about renovating it were made with having like a really musical youth scene in mind. I got to town in 2008 and kind of felt in some ways like I'd found like the last little pocket of the 1990s.
Huh.
There was all these kind of like young metalhead kids, just it was a very wholesome thing. They'd show up and, be like pounding away on the double bass pedals and everything, after school. So it ended up being a spot that, ironically, after a while probably got more use from 30-somethings, as a music venue. But, so be it. One of the biggest features of the Brick House as a musical hub was a band called the Flaming Dragons of Middle Earth. F-Dome was kind of the house band of the Brick House in some ways because, it really came out of that teen center. Founding member and leader Danny Cruz was a Brick House youth originally, and adults in the community were coming in to play music with him. Kind of ended up forming this really fun kind of band cult phenomenon. And it was a really, whoever wanted to be in the band, Danny encouraged to do that. They went through some periods where they, tried to do songs, but for the most part, it was really a free-for-all kind of experience. There were sometimes, if someone wanted to book a show on a Thursday, they had a weekly practice booked at the Brick House on Thursday. So I'd have to go to them and ask if we could do a show. And if Danny was interested at all in the bands that were playing, he'd say yes, but only if they could open. Some pretty wild experiences watching people from out of town who maybe hadn't heard of or encountered F-Dome before, having the show stolen from them by the opening act. And Danny passed away in December 2017. So that leaves, I think, a big hole in our town and in our music scene here.
Well, I remember you did a beautiful tribute to him in the Montague Reporter. He seemed like kind of exactly the type of person that someplace like the Brick House would want to attract. He benefited from having that space, and he also brought so many people into his orbit because of his enthusiasm and kind of raw creativity. He
got me into the band, in what turned out to be the last year. I just had watched them so many times, I decided that maybe they just needed sometimes an extra drummer to my ear. So, I would try and scrounge up at least one drumstick and at least one drum and kind of sit in the back line and maybe push things in like a little bit more of a krautrocky direction, or just having a little regular pulse at the back end. And it was really wonderful to be able to play in that band. And even if it, sometimes tipped the performer to audience ratio even further in the room.
I have to ask about the elephant in the room here, and that is, your name is Michael Jackson. Listeners may be aware that there is a Michael Jackson out there closely associated with music. I'm curious if you have any strong feelings one way or another about sharing a name, growing up with that name, when that individual commanded a bit of the spotlight.
I hated his music because of that. I did get a lot of grief for it. Off the Wall was already out when my parents had me. They just didn't think that he would continue to be as famous as he was, and that it was more likely that the more famous musician over the course of my lifetime would be Joe Jackson.
Interesting.
So, yep, bad call. My mom and dad, I've forgiven them for it. Maybe not until after he passed away did I forgive them for it. And it's been a funny process of like me really coming around on his music and recognizing what a genius he was, and the rest of the society around me moving from listening to him all the time to kind of like not, because of the harm that he caused. Yeah, that's a can of worms.
I was having another conversation about just all of the musicians that are deservedly being canceled these days. Michael Jackson, of course, one of them. Did you begin to appreciate his music before? I guess this stuff has always been out there about him abusing children, but did you come to appreciate his music before that kind of the second wave of that crested?
There was just maybe a few years in the middle there where I got to hear his music and appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think that even before the pedophilia story, for some reason, like a lot of the teasing at one point that I was getting, or the jokes that people would make about Michael Jackson were like, had to do with their own like racist anxieties, and that shifted over time. It was always an interesting window into people's like, which joke is going to come out of this person's mouth.
Well, I'm sorry you had to deal with that growing up. It is what it is, but at least your name isn't Michael Bolton.
Why don't you just go by Mike instead of Michael?
No way. Why should I change? He's the one who sucks.
I love that scene. Yeah, I absolutely love that scene. And I do like that I'm fairly hard to Google.
Yes.
It's gone from being, notorious. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I'd get into a new school district and be named Michael Jackson and be instantly famous. And I feel like the thing that makes up for that is now, it's actually kind of like a little bit of an anonymizing thing now that we're all on the Google.
I share a name with a not very famous musician, but there was a James Lowe who was the singer in the Electric Prunes.
Yeah.
No one's ever teased me about that, though. I don't think anybody knows who the Electric Prunes are.
You have to introduce yourself to people and say, not the other James Lowe. Make it really awkward, like as if everyone knows.
I'll try that out post-pandemic next time I'm at a party. Mike Jackson, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, James. This has been fun.
Zögernd.